Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Fratkin, and this is the Roundtable Chats podcast, a platform where ideas are challenged and the life stories of extraordinary people from around the globe are explored, one conversation at a time. Today, my guest is my Finnish kindred spirits, Juho Laaksonen. Juho and I met over Facebook after he wrote a review for the podcast and recommended I speak to a best-selling science author from Finland. We instantly had chemistry, and after talking about a plethora of fascinating topics, I realized this would be a perfect guest for the roundtable. And he did not disappoint. Juho and I discussed many of the world's problems, like climate change, education reform, women's rights, and even the Me Too movement. I love his scientific perspective and original analysis to these pressing issues. I cannot wait for you to listen to this one, folks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, here is Juho Laaksonen. To begin, Juho, what are you grateful for in life, though? I want to know more about you.
Yeah. So, of course, the first thing that pops up from my mind is obviously family. That's the highest priority of my life. So I have a wife and 2 kids, and I'm really grateful. They're coming up fine. The kids they're really open-minded. So I'm happy with the parenting done so far, because they're asking a lot of questions, and of course they are like the nuisance and the love of my life, and I think that applies to a lot of parents. I don't consider myself to be like the parenting is meaning of my life. I'm not one of those people, but of course they are the love of my life. Other things I would say is my work. I'm working for an association. It's a non-profit association dedicated to promote natural building materials and building materials and compositions from renewable sources. And that gives me a lot of, let's say, artistic freedom. I can plan my own work. Pretty much anything I want to do, I'm able to do.
Wow.
With very little resources, of course. I'm representing industry that is composed of small companies, but they're doing fantastic job in supporting my efforts. And I'm very grateful that I can do like a job that I find very rewarding. It's satisfying a lot of my ambitions, professional ambitions. And I would have to say that the third thing I'm grateful is that from very young age onwards, I was capable of detecting the true sources of happiness in my life. Because I think a lot of people waste a lot of time sort of pursuing things that they sort of maybe think that they're going to bring them satisfaction and happiness, like a lot of wealth, for example, or things like that, fame, fortune, those kind of things. So I would have to say that's with my family, that's pretty much the thing I'm most grateful for, because that means that I'm capable of liquidating as much happiness to my life as I ever could wish to do. So that's something I'm very grateful for.
No, that's really touching. You brought up a lot there. I was just thinking, on the concept of happiness. For me personally, one of the best things that changed my perspective on it was traveling. And so I have, half my family lives in France. And growing up from a very little age, I always saw there's a different way to live life, And so like in America, I was happy, but there's a big focus on you need to get the right job, you need to be successful. You need to work really hard. You need to get as much money as possible. And then you'll be happy, maybe. And then it's like in France, it's like we would have these 3 hour long dinners and we would just spend a lot of time together. And no one would talk about their jobs really, unless there was something relevant to note about it, or nobody would talk about their future or their career. It's just like very present oriented. And so from very early on, I was also kind of aware of what made me happy. And it would be either
Was
small
doing a
things.
lot of work. So my wife took a huge responsibility on the parenting in the early years. I made up some ground on that because now I'm working from home. So I have been able to spend the mornings and the afternoons with my kids being at home before and after school. But yeah, my life didn't change as much or drastically as one would expect. That's probably one of the regrets that I have is from those early years with children. So responsibility was sort of carried by my wife for a number of years. But yeah, of course, it changes one's perspective on, let's say, for example, risk taking. It becomes clear that having to be in a car accident or whatever is going to affect more people than before being a parent. So I became more cautious. I think that's something that is usually achieved by getting more years under your belt as well. I would say that risk taking is somewhat trait of young person anyways. But yeah, I would say I became more cautious. I slowed down my speeds in traffic and things like that. But I wouldn't say it was like everything changed. Nothing was
Right.
was like it used to be.
Sure.
Okay, maybe some like small things like no one anymore asks like what's my favorite dinosaur. Or things like that. So they're just curious how the kids are doing. So yeah.
Okay, and also I wanted to go back to another thing you mentioned, the gratitude about your children, about how they're very curious. And curiosity is something I've talked about with previous guests, and it's one of those things that you see a lot more in children than adults. Like sometimes adults kind of grow out of their curiosity a little bit, and how to harness that. And I love this passage or video with Neil deGrasse Tyson where he was talking about how he was asked by the audience, what do I do to have my kids be more curious? What do I do for my kids to like science more? And he says, well, just leave a pair of binoculars on the table and just don't force them to play with it. Just leave it there and let them naturally find it, get out of their way. I don't know if you've seen that video, but
yeah, that's actually like, let's say, if you take a look at my guide to parenting, that's like the prelude, if you want.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Like the first
It's
chapter is that's been a huge inspiration for me. It's funny that you picked up that specific video because that's my take on the things, and I actually realized that it became like a concrete idea that actually every child is a scientist, and that impacted me and my parenting much. Like it had a huge impact on how to approach the difficult parts of parenting. Like of course you want to teach them as many things as you want, but the main objective should always be to make sure that they grow up being open-minded and curious, because that's their default position, and you shouldn't be killing that curiosity by pushing too much information into their little brains. And I've been very cautious. I like all the natural science stuff, and I'm really happy that both of my daughters, the firstborn especially, is very interested in getting into the details, like how stuff works, and she is willing to peel off the layers, like, well, yeah, okay, so electricity is like, it works like that, so okay, what makes it work like that? And she's really digging deep, and I'm really enjoying it. And it also helps me a lot, because part of my or one aspect of my work is teaching. It may not happen in schools. Usually it's like some public speaking events, stuff like that. But still, it's if you can teach something to a child, then your odds of being able to explain concepts and things to adults are improved, I think.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
dumbing down things and making them sort of something that the layman can also comprehend. It's very important. I really concentrate a lot in that. So that's funny enough that you brought up the Degrasse Tyson video, because that's actually had a huge impact on my parenting.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I noticed because as I was mentioning the reference, I saw this little glimmer in your eyes, a little smile you
Yeah.
made. I'm like, oh, he knows.
Yeah.
So, I'll definitely throughout this conversation now just be like, throwing out little references here and there and see just how connected we really are. But you reminded me of another thing I like to watch on YouTube. It's this brilliant series where they take an expert in anything. So let's say the first one I saw was a neuroscientist, and they have to explain some concept in neuroscience, like brain neuroplasticity, for instance. But they have to do it at 6 different levels. So they start by teaching it to like a 6-year-old, then to like a 12-year-old, then a high school student, college student, grad student. Yeah, and it's really interesting
Yeah.
to see how they approach it, for each level, and how well they understand the material by being able to explain it at any of those levels. And it's really entertaining. Like, I don't know if you've heard of that, but I was reminded when you were saying, being able to teach to a 6-year-old, and yeah.
Yeah. At this point, I think it's natural for me to try and run through the experiment I did with my kids. They were aged, I think, 7 and 5 at the time, and I was driving to visit my parents. They live like 350 kilometers apart from me, so we had a lot of time to spend in a car. And of course, kids of that age, they usually tend to get bored.
Yeah.
Like 20 kilometers driven, and they're already like, are we already there? And is it going to take a long time? And then we started to discuss about some science things, and can't remember the details on how exactly did we run into the concept of the wind power. So they started asking questions like how is the windmill producing electricity, and how that stuff works. And I was like, well, okay, this is going to be difficult. But then I came up with some pretty good explanations and analogies, and I knew that my kids had been playing with magnets, so they knew the concept of a magnet being bipolar, and skipping rope was another thing that they were familiar with. And I thought, well, okay, so with the skipping rope, it's pretty easy to explain what a wave is, so that they will they have the ability to conceptualize the whole thing. So I explained them, well, asked them if they ever had seen a skipping rope that the other end is tied to a fence or any other structure, and when you're waving the other end, the free end of the skipping rope, that there's the wave movement, and they were familiar with the wave movement. And I told them, well, the skipping rope is actually not moving, so one end is held by a hand, and the other one is tied to the fence. And they were like, yeah, that's true. And I was explaining, well, the wave is still sort of going from one end to another, even though the skipping rope is not. And they were like, yeah, we get the picture. And then I explained to them, well, do you know how the blades work with the windmill? And they were like, yeah, it's the wind pushing the blade, and it's capable of passing the blade easier from one side, so that makes the thing rotate. And I was like, yeah, okay. So the next thing is that there's a magnet inside the axis that is turned by the wind, and the magnet is pulling the electrons in in the copper coil that is inside the windmill, and the magnet is making the electrons to do a wave movement, like the skipping rope, and then the copper wire transmits the wave movement all the way to the power socket, and then you can put like a cake mixer there, and then the same thing happens in reverse. So the wave movement is pulling the magnet in the mixer, and that causes the mixer blades to turn. And they were like, "Wow, it's it's so simple." And yeah, I was like, "Okay, yeah, it is actually. It's not that difficult to explain difficult seeming things when you try to sort of dumb them down enough and to make the conceptualizing possible." So that's something it's a very good memory. I'm probably going to hold on to that memory for a very long time, if not the whole lifespan of my personal being.
Wow, no, thank you for sharing that. No, it's incredible. I'm curious, so it's like how far back does it go, your interest or your passion in science? Like when did you know, how old were you when you're like, this is what I want to do with my life, or I want to learn more about this, or this is really interesting?
I would say I was destined to be like some form of science. It was pretty clear from very early on. Like paleontology would have been like my first choice, because as a, let's say, age from 3 to 5, I made my mom to read like this book for children with dinosaurs, all of the dinosaur breeds, and I knew them in and out, both in Finnish and in Latin, and I knew all of their names and all of the text and specifics given for each individual dinosaur. So that was sort of my first passion. I can still remember some of them, but not to the same extent I used to. Then a big influencer in my life has been my father, and he used to be an entrepreneur in construction. So that's something that has been always sort of, I've seen that so from very early on. And whenever we went to a cabin or something needed to be fixed at home, I was always going to be there to help my dad. So I was exposed to crafting and doing things from very early on. My father had like a very modest, but nonetheless like a workshop for woodworking in our house, like wood turning and things like that. And he would do like all sorts of little things from wood. So that was something that always interested me, and it still interests me. I really like to get myself dirty. I like doing things, and that's probably never going to leave me, because kids like to play in the mud, and I'm still the same. I'm doing clay plastering all over the house I'm renovating, pretty much all the ceilings and walls, and even part of the floors and things like that. And I like to experiment. So I was given the opportunity to actually maintain the curiosity of a young mind. I still consider myself to be almost childish, if you will.
That's great.
I have a very low threshold for doing something that people usually consider to be embarrassing. So I'm like that. I'm doing silly things, and also I like to do controversial things. Like I sent you a video clip on my ambition of doing like a modern take on a clay hut, if you will. So things like that. I like to do things different than other people.
Right.
And I've met a lot of people who see the world in the same way, that we should try to invoke progress in areas that we don't see much progress, and to do things just to make them a little different. And I think there's a lot of value in that. That's a good way of failing, and we learn when we fail. And also, it sort of gives a fresh look on all things. And I really like that. But to get back to your question, I think when I was in high school, I'm not sure. I've always been like good in school. I got some good grades. Like I think my average was 9 point something from ninth grade, and I went to high school, but I wasn't very ambitious with mathematics or anything. I've always liked mathematics, but the big influence was that I went to a really good high school in Helsinki, the capital of Finland, and there I was accompanied by people with ambitions, and that sort of that helped me with the peer pressure being good at school. That sort of grew the interest of getting good grades and learning things, and so that was a big influencer in my life. And after high school, I spent some time just working. I was doing some construction type of works, and then I went to military service and spent a year there, and that was pretty much when I decided to pursue the engineering in my studies, because I got I was really lucky. I got to be accepted in a special forces in engineering troops, like something that only 4 people in a year in the whole Finland gets to do. So it's I was leading a group of specialist engineers, and we got to do a lot of demolition work with explosives, and we built some bridges, and we had like this one assignment that we needed to do like a steel structure bridge, like 100 something meters, and there was a lot of difficulty with the engineering. There was an engineering company on site, and pretty much all the calculations that they did went wrong, and that sort of forced me to come up with solutions and ideas on how to approach, how to fix the situation, and I found that to be very interesting. So I decided, well, I'm going to make more of this kind of things. So yeah, and of course Legos. They're I think the world owns a lot to Denmark for inventing Legos. It's like that's also something that's actually influenced a lot of my curiosity, and that's probably part of the reasons why I've been so interested in building stuff. So shout out to to Denmark.
No, that's awesome. Did you ever give Legos to your daughters, like as a Christmas gift, or were they ever interested in Legos?
Yeah, they do play with Legos. Yeah,
nice.
Yeah.
Passing it on.
Yeah, and my younger daughter, she's like a semi-professional in crafts. She even built her own like a station for or workbench for crafting things, and she's like this upcycle fan. She doesn't like new clothing. She's just waiting to get some clothing that her bigger sister used. She really likes recycling and upcycling and things like that, and it's really enjoyable to watch them explore and well, sometimes kids, well, they have some things that they want and they make requests, and one of my favorite ones was my for the younger daughter. I think she was 5 years old when she was like, well, I would really like to have a laboratory. And I was like, wow, what? so we built like from cardboard and whatever, we built like some sort of microscope type of thing, and then I explained her how to start doing investigations and gave her a rock and told her to to do like a plan on how to come up with the most reasonable analysis on what it is, and the initial reaction was, well, it's a rock. I know what a rock looks like, and I was like, well, how can you tell that it's not like it's like a piece of plastic just made to look like a stone, so maybe it's just crystallized salt or something. And then she was like, yeah, okay, so we can't take anything for granted. And then she drafted like a plan on how to test the stone, like would it melt in or dissolve in water and things like that. And it was a lot of fun to run experiments on that, and to teach the process of how to investigate and not to make too many assumptions.
Yeah, no, that's all super important. I was just thinking that I think you've succeeded in something that I've read a lot about as a problem that people want to fix. I hear a lot of feminists in America say, we need more women engineers. We need more women in STEM fields and in science and things like that. And it looks like you were able to do that very effortlessly almost. And it's made me wonder that if a lot of the children or women, young women who are already interested in science and engineering at a very young age, how much has that to do with parenting? How much does that have to do with maybe having different people in their family who are similarly minded? Because I think what makes science distinct in some sense from some of the other disciplines or subjects is like it's a totally different way of thinking and mindset. And so, yeah, I'm just curious what you think.
Yeah, I think so. And there's these all these presumptions that, like, let's say, for example, the color labeling. It starts with that, like girls, right. They have to wear pink or red, and blue and green are colors for boys, and things like that. And of course, I see a lot of it happening with like selection of toys, for example. It's like girls like dolls and boys like the Legos and things like that. And I'm not sure if that's completely false. I would concede that there's like some gravitation towards different things between girls and boys. It's difficult to tell because I only have 2 daughters. I don't have like I can't compare directly the whole thing, but I would say there's Jordan Peterson might be onto something that girls and boys are different, and they are obviously, but I'm not sure if it's to the extent that they're brought up with. I think it's important to give them options, like sure. If they want to play with Legos, then there should be Legos available rather than just the dollhouse for the girls and things like that.
For sure, yeah.
And like I don't know exactly how it's called in English, like subject in school, like crafting, and it's divided into 2 things. It's like technical crafting, which is like woodworking and soldering some electronic circuits or something like that. And the other one is to do like sewing and knitting and things like that. And it used to be divided pretty much between girls and boys. So boys would do the technical, and girls would do the let's say fabric related things. And now they're doing like a mix. I think all the pupils are doing the same things. And I think it was yesterday or this morning that my firstborn told that she enjoys much more the technical things. So it's, and I'm not sure. I haven't been like overly cautious not to push her into the direction that I want to. I might have done that unwillingly, but that's sort of, I'm not pushing anything. But when she's interested in finding out things on molecules or whatever, I'm happy to explain.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hold back. And I've realized that kids are, it's something that I think the school system should take more into consideration, that they're still, in some sense, sort of underappreciating the intelligence of children. And one example I could give is mathematics. It's something that in the early years they do, and I think something in the first grade they start to learn how to do some basic mathematical things. And I was surprised to hear that the teaching is sort of assuming that let's say when they're doing like 1 + 1 and 1 + 2, and they're not doing the same opposite. They're not doing 1 - 1. They're not doing 2 - 1, and negative things are not dealt with at all. And I was considering that to be pretty strange, because as I see the mathematical universe and how I would explain it to a child is that mathematical universe is a human concept. It doesn't exist. It's just an imaginary thing that it exists, and you're inside the space, and you're sort of in the center of the whole thing. And there's mathematical ways to navigate throughout the whole space. And let's say positive numbers, you can conceptualize that as being forwards, and negative is going backwards, and things like that. So I think that makes mathematics so much easier to learn when you get the whole concept.
Yes.
Rather than assuming that it's going to be too complicated. It's easier to teach one thing at a time, even though the thing is one thing. There's no reason to.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Why would you separate that thing when it's just a normal thing? You can go forwards or you can go backwards. It's very easy to comprehend, and children are very, very much capable of absorbing those kind of concepts, I think.
Yeah, it's really more just how it's taught and how clear the teacher is more than the content, I think. And it reminds me of something Elon Musk was saying when he was criticizing, I think, Common Core education or just public education in the U.S. I mean, he's a billionaire, so he can just create his own school for his children. But he had an interesting approach, though, for it, where it's almost like an engineering school for primary school children. But what they do is, instead of he has them solve a problem, and then they learn about different mathematical concepts in light of that problem, right? So he might say they might, I don't know, have to fix some sort of machine but something very basic, and they might say like, okay, well, what's the first step? Well, we need to do something with this component of it, so we need a wrench. Oh, what's a wrench? Time to teach you what a wrench does, and then they apply it instead of just having a class on wrenches, in this example.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy, and I think that's the approach that should be taken. And I think it's more in teaching, I would say, if anywhere, applies the concept of quality over quantity.
Yes,
it's because that's pretty much the core of things. And it's even going to be more so in the future, because obviously all of the knowledge that we've accumulated as a humankind is going to be available.
Yeah.
So the most essential tools that humans are going to be needing is how to get that knowledge and how to apply that knowledge into things. And we're still sort of teaching our children, let's say, a little backwards, I would say, if you know what I mean.
I do. Yes.
Pretty difficult thing to explain, but the tools are going to be way different.
Right. The future is going to be so different.
What they used to be and what they even currently are. So that's something that I would like to see it changing. Well, I'm having to say bad things about the mathematical teaching. I would also say that there's been a huge progress, because I remember like throughout my whole school from all the way to the 9th grade, mathematics never... I pretty much always knew everything that was taught. I didn't sort of get the feeling that I would learn something new that much. But now they're doing like equations at the first grade, and I think that's fantastic. I think the kids should be challenged more, and I think they're capable of taking on the challenge.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm not talking about going full steam ahead with everyone. There's always going to be differences in development with children, and that's also something that I see a lot of good progress being done. Like I remember being so bored throughout most of my school.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't happening anything, and things we needed to do was like, well, I already know it better than what it's
very
demanded.
it's very stagnant.
And now we have like different. It's not like putting that there's like better kids or whatever, but it's like the speed of reading, and they're divided into 3 different categories, so that the ones that are reading faster and are more capable, so they're provided more elaborate tasks, so that they will continue to be challenged and be excited about school and to be learning, not to get bored.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think teaching is also something I would really enjoy, and I get to do that every now and then. I really do like it, but I don't think I would be able to do like a career out of teaching. I'm like, let's say, in a good and in a bad way, I get excited about new things. So I need to be in a position where I'm sort of able to follow different kind of lines of research. I'm getting excited about something, and I need to be able to pursue that. And I'm like I said in the introduction, that I'm really grateful for my job, and I think what makes it so fulfilling for me is that it's not it is like the fields I'm working on, they're like so vastly distributed throughout all of the scientific field. There's like microbiology is now something that we're incorporating to the building sciences, and that's very fascinating. It's providing a lot of answers and a lot of new ways to approach how we do building sciences, and how buildings should be serving the inhabitants and things like that. And that's why I'm not seeing myself doing a long career as a teacher, because I would get bored.
That's a common theme.
Do something different every now and then.
Yeah. So something I wanted to probe further, because it's so interesting. I had mentioned to you earlier before we started recording, but I have 2 Norwegian friends who I met through Effective Altruism, and we had this really great conversation about something they were concerned about with children ages like 5 or 6 right now, which is a new thing that's happening in Norwegian schools, which is, I know Norway is very egalitarian, and I'm sure Finland is just as egalitarian, but my friend was a little concerned because, let's say you're 5 years old and you're really good at reading. You just love to read, and you're just very advanced. What some teachers were doing in public schools in Norway, I don't know how many, but it's just an anecdote, but they would say to the 5-year-old kid, because he's the only one reading and none of the other students know how to read yet or don't want to, they say, you're not allowed to read in class for this year. You can start when you're 6, but this year nobody reads. And it's like, yeah, okay, you can read at home, I guess, outside of school, but to me that just seems very bizarre. This could be like a future brilliant novelist or a future brilliant science. Why would you be restricting? We should be giving him more books, or her more books, like not taking them away.
I think something that I've been thinking a little bit about, this is not in any way my specialty, but like if we're talking about special needs or some extra help needed for some children in school, that's usually provided. That's right. Like the default position in schools. But what about the other way around? I think the special need can also be like, if you're overly advanced to your peers, it's bound to be very boring. So that will, in worst case scenario, reflect to the whole concept of getting education if you're always constantly bored and not being challenged. And I think you know about the Einstein fish.
Yeah, I've heard the quote.
Yeah, so I think that's like something that could be presented in reverse as well.
Okay.
Do you mind? Do you mind sort of going through the concept of the fish, so that if some of the listeners are not familiar with the concept?
Yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah. So, and I have my own feelings about it, but yeah, I hear it all the time. So it's this idea. Oh man, I don't know. Can you tell the quote perfectly? I could paraphrase it, but I don't know if I can recite the exact words.
I can try.
Okay, please.
I can
You
try.
might be better.
If a fish is being evaluated according to its ability to climb a tree, the fish will live its whole life thinking it's stupid.
Yes, perfect.
I think something like that.
That was really good. Yes, so that's the quote. Oh,
yeah.
And I think there's something before it, and maybe that's what I was contentious about, is before everything you just said. It starts with saying everybody's a genius, but if you're a fish judged by the ability to climb a tree, then you think you're stupid your whole life. And I know it's unclear whether or not Albert Einstein actually said that, like the actual resource of it. And I was always a little skeptical, because I'm like, a genius would never say everybody's a genius. Like, there's no way, because they know their brain is different, you know? Like, and so I feel like it's a very feel good kind of message. And of course it's useful in some things. And I agree that you have students who will never use calculus for the rest of their life, or history, or different things. And they're being forced to year after year after year after year. And I'm like, this is not an efficient system at all. So like, I totally get the sentiment behind it, and I support that. But I like that you're thinking of the reverse. Like, if you didn't go into more depth, like,
because it's like the kids, when they're bored, they're not going to sit behind their desks and be silent. So they're going to start making noises, and they're moving around, and they might end up being like, I don't know, bully is not the right word, but someone that will bring disturbance to the class and the learning environment. I think that's something that they might adapt, that sort of label, which is not the children's fault at all. It's just the getting bored. And I think that's something that, well, I never caused any hassle in the classroom, but I still do remember, like it was yesterday, how boring it was.
Just looking at the clock,
like why do I have to read slowly when it's more difficult to read slowly, because I know how to read like properly. So, I was like thinking like, why, and never getting any answers.
Yeah.
And I think it's a difficult issue, because I don't want to see like some sort of elite pupils class or whatever. I think pluralism is way to go. It's a very effective way of sort of equivocating the social indifferences and imbalances in society. And of course in Finland, none of the schools, even the university, we don't have any tuitions, and the government is supporting students with dwelling and costs like that, and they get a little fee, as it's their job to get an education, and that sort of enables anyone, no matter what kind of where you're born, or regardless to your family or wealth and whatever. So anyone can get a good education, and I think that's. I find it a little disturbing that's sort of not the default position in a civilized country. I think that's only it's an investment, not so much as an expense to society.
Right. Oh, no, for sure. And education is something I think about all the time. I do want to be a professor one day, but I do want to make changes, right, into the education system, because it's just like, there's a lot of people being ignored. And so, I mean, I have a personal reason for that and other anecdotes, but Real quick, something I wanted to get back to what you said about boredom. So my dad is a doctor, kind of a private doctor, and he had a patient who at seventh grade was like clinically depressed, right? And so the parents bring him in, and he's bored. That's really all it is. My dad, they think he has all these physical issues, all these physical illnesses, mental illness, whatever, right? And my dad just talks to him, the kid, alone, one-on-one, for like 30 minutes, and he's like, he doesn't have any problems. He's just bored. He just needs more stimulation. So at seventh grade, the kid skipped eighth grade, then ninth grade, then 10th grade, then 11th grade, then 12th grade, was going to college at 13. And then he felt he was at his level. And then he excelled, for certain, I think he did some neuroscience and whatnot. But when I heard that story, it's like this boredom is a more serious issue than people realize. There are real long run ramifications, including depression. So, which is a very serious problem nowadays. So, I really it's like, yes, of course, we should be helping the students who struggle the most, but also acknowledge that students who have really high aptitude also are struggling out of the opposite reason. So,
I think that's overlooked by.
Yeah.
So, to some extent, yeah. But I think there's some initiatives to fix that.
Yes.
Because already the changes I'm seeing that there's like through the division of 3 groups regarding to the speed of reading and things like that. And I think it's a pretty good sign of at least some sort of progress being made.
Mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. What else was I going to say? But yeah, just on the subject of education in general, if I had more power than I do, or if I could really just change things with a snap of a finger, I think I mentioned this in an earlier podcast, but there's three big changes I'd want to make, which is like at a primary school level, you require like 20 to 30 minutes of meditation. At a secondary school level is ethics and learn morality. And then at a high school level, you learn personal finance. So you know how to not be in debt. And personal finance to me is the most important because it's something that every kid needs to know before they go into the real world, whether they're going to college or not. And yet they don't often learn that. And it's like, what's going on here, at least in the U.S. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think those are pretty good initiatives to start working on.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think philosophy is sort of something that, it's Christopher Hitchens from whom I heard the definition that philosophy is the human's love for knowledge or thinking.
Yes.
Not sure. And I think it's like that's opened up my eyes. I've been ignorant to philosophy. I was. Nice. I don't know. For me, the label was like carrying something other than what philosophy actually is. Right. I was sort of miseducated on what philosophy is, and that's changed somewhat after listening to all those good, brilliant minds and philosophers.
Nice.
And yeah. So I'm more than willing to see that to become part of the curriculum.
Yeah, no, definitely.
From very early on, I think.
And having critical discussions and debates. I mean, the trolley problem is very simple, so I think you could totally teach that to like a 12-year-old or 11-year-old. I mean, anyone who thinks you can, I think just don't understand 12-year-olds or 11-year-olds that well. I mean, they can totally handle it. They know what morality is, too. I mean, you can even customize it. If the trolley thing is too out there, you could just be like, oh, you could steal a candy bar when no one's looking, or something, and just talk about the ramifications of that. You need really good teachers, maybe, but I've always really enjoyed philosophy. I never studied it formally, but I've always been reading books. And are there any philosophers in particular that really stand out to you that like really blew your mind or really affected your thinking?
Well, I would say Daniel Dennett.
Okay.
I really like it. Well, I can't say all of his work, but let's say vast majority of the work I've been in contact with. Christopher Hitchens sort of not primarily seen as a philosopher, although he did like a degree on philosophy.
Yes.
But it's not so much that I would agree to to many of the things that he represented. But I think what I learned from Christopher Hitchens is to put value on opposing ideas, because I think we value the being right so much that we forget that actually disagreement and division is what drives progress in all of the areas. So in politics, for example, I used to sort of, I was, well, how to put it, I found it difficult to respect opposing views because I was feeling so strongly that we need to do, like, let's say, more humane politics. And how would someone advocate something else? And pretty late, I would say I was already 30 when I sort of woke up to the whole thing that, actually, that's not the way to go. We need to have these difficult discussions, and we constantly need to revise our stances on different issues. And well, let's say like the climate change and related topics like energy production. That's something that I've been forced to do a lot of revising of my own ideas and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. On the subject of climate change, something I was learning recently, and I was actually talking to a climate scientist recently at a Amsterdam skeptics meeting, and I've always felt there's a bit of a gap between what climate scientists do and then what certain political groups do with that information. And I remember I had volunteered at this climate change lobby in Boulder, Colorado, and my job was to go undercover and talk and pretend to be a conservative and talk to different conservative groups that are vehemently opposed to climate change, and then really see what they actually think behind closed doors. And I noticed that they had much more distrust or animosity towards certain liberals than to say scientists, and I thought that was really interesting. That maybe there's more to it.
I would say I've seen similar effects in Finland. I'm seeing like some political parties are, well, I could be mistaken horribly, but that's sort of my personal take on the thing, that some parties are advocating some solutions just because the opposing parties is sort of opposing the thing that they start advocating. And obviously nuclear energy is something that is sort of in the epicenter of those discussions.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. And I always thought the easiest thing a conservative can do, let's say you own a business and you just want to minimize your costs, and so you don't want any taxes on pollution or anything that would help with climate change might hurt your business. So instead of having an argument about the legislation or about the issues, if you just say, I don't believe in climate change, that makes for much easier debate because you're just denying a problem altogether. So it's not going to get anywhere.
I think I know exactly what you mean, and I didn't want to do a script on our conversation. I wanted to be like a conversation, but one of your questions was that what problems anger me?
Yes.
Or something like that. And that relates to this topic so tightly that I'm going to bring it up at this point, because the thing that really annoys me a lot, even to extent of making me angry, is that the availability of knowledge is it's so huge.
Yes.
So it's very easy to derive arguments that seem to be backed up by science or scientific findings. You can cherry pick data and all that. And I'm sort of, well, it's poorly hidden cover, but still I'm in a Facebook group that compiles from climate change either denialists or those that sort of oppose of Finland doing anything. And the argument is always the same. Well, there's only this and that many of us doing things, and there's China with 1.4 billion people, so we're not going to make any effect, and things like that. And they're really good, almost let's say professional in cherry picking data.
Yeah.
So that they're doing like these fancy infographics in Excel, and it looks like it's very scientific approach, and it's like seemingly good arguments against the mainstream science, and that annoys me a lot. It's so easy to do like this. I don't know. It has a specific label, but it's the debate tactic is sort of formed around the fact that it's so much faster to compile bad arguments that it takes way more time to debunk those, because it takes a lot of effort to tackle each individual claim. So you have to do fact checking, and you have to sort of follow the proper route.
Yeah.
And so that annoys me a lot. Like something that I know to be false, but it takes so much time and effort to prove it wrong or to debunk the whole thing, so that I don't have the resources, or hardly anyone has the resources. So that's sort of the dark side of being around this vast body of knowledge, I would say.
Yeah, no, on that subject, it's like everyone has a computer in their pocket, pretty much, at least in developed countries, but even in developing countries, many of them have smartphones, and it's like, there's no excuse. There's this inherent laziness. I remember one time, it's just kind of a random example, but there's a YouTube comment, and someone wanted to know the name or what somebody did, and they said, like, can someone just comment? I don't want to look it up. I'm too lazy. And it's like, what? Really? Like, you can't, like, the browser's right there to search the name. Are you serious? Just wait. What better things do you have to do? You're already commenting on a YouTube video. Like, what is this? It's ridiculous,
Yeah, and one other sort of phenomena around the whole thing is that people make an argument, and if it involves like citation to whatever, then it will fly. There's very little people that will actually go and search if there is the paper that they're citing or whatever, or what the paper is actually saying, because it's so laborious to go through like some study report with 450 pages, and some of it being like really dense to comprehend. So it's like people are doing that all the time, and also companies are doing that. They're doing like marketing materials that will cite to some specific study, and it's taken out of context in most cases, or something other, like abusing the actual data in some study, taking bits and pieces and twisting it to serve your own purposes. So that's something that annoys me a lot.
And also,
I sort of run into that problem in my line of work, because the position is that the industry that I'm representing, they're the small guys, and the opposition are the big multinational companies, and they are the ones with the market share. So they don't want to see change, because the status quo is serving them their purpose. They're doing a lot of sales, so anything that would change it will be a threat to them. So they will try to slow down the progress in whatever means they can.
Right. Yeah. And a piece I was going to add to that, bringing back something we were talking about over Facebook, but Hans Rosling, his book Factfulness, and it's like how many people in general misunderstand statistics, and the ramifications of that, because it's exploited all the time, statistics. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, that's obviously very true, and I still struggle myself to to navigate through. Let's say I'm faced with a huge body of some data, like measurements from the study, and I'm still struggling to master the whole thing. And Hans Rosling, I've seen him live once, and that's sort of one of those moments that changed my life in a way, because anyone who's familiar with the presentations that he used to do, unfortunately, he died at some point, so 2017. But the presentations that he made, it became sort of the benchmark for my own presentations.
Wow.
Because that's sort of the let's say that's where I want to be. Obviously, the limitations with resources and my abilities there, so I fall short. But that's where I'm aiming always, to make things interesting, make things
so important,
easy to comprehend, and it's like all around like perfect way of presenting anything. It's like wow,
it's extraordinary. Yeah, absolutely. I'll link one of his TED Talk videos, or whichever one you love of his. That would be good for anyone who doesn't know who Hans Rosling is, because that's the best way to learn about him. I think. Just watch one of those videos.
And I think he's never done anything that I wouldn't recommend. I think he was just a brilliant guy.
Absolutely. And the technology that is, I love how it's a generational thing. So his children were able to finish the book after he passed away, and helped create the whatever the technology is that creates these amazing ways of depicting data. And it's had a big effect on me as well, not necessarily my career yet, but as a public speaker, and as just a way of parsing through all the data and all the constant information that's hitting us in the world, So the combinations of Hans Rosling, Steven Pinker with Alignment Now, which you said you were reading now, and then even Jordan Peterson could be included in this, is like this overwhelming case for optimism. You look at all these different dimensions of where we're improving. It's like, okay, yes, there's a million problems in the world, and we're constantly seeing it every single day, and those are significant, but that's just one point in time. We have been getting better as a human species, and we have so much more to do, but we have been progressing.
From Sam Harris, there's like one of my favorite ways of putting the whole thing. You're probably familiar with the. I can't remember the phrasing exactly, but it was like Sam Harris is explaining that it's not surprising that we find all these incredible sort of unbalanced situations and wrongdoings when we just descended from trees and started to build global civilization, starting with technologies based on rocks and sticks.
Right.
And it's like, that's something that we need to consider, is that the progress is never finished. It's an ongoing process, and we're just experiencing it at this point of time. So we need to maybe be a little more merciful towards ourselves, and to make sure that the progress goes to the right direction, so the inequalities are being fixed and things like that. And I think it's it's a very good way of dealing with the possible anxiety that comes with the fact when you realize that there's like 19,000 children under the age of 5 dying each day. And it's the same goes for the climate change thing. It's very easy to get like neurotic and frightened about the whole thing, and you need tools to sort of cope with the hard things. I know, because I experienced myself this anxiety when I started to realize all the, let's say, worst case scenarios regarding to climate change, and it took a little while to sort of start breathing normal again, and to figure out, well, how can I make an impact on this, and what I should be doing, and what I shouldn't be doing is also very important question.
I'm curious how you went from fear or anxiety to action, to actually doing something, because that's a transformation in a way.
Yeah, actually, that's sort of. I've never done like meditation, at least not according to let's say the techniques or whatever. But I've been always sort of contemplating on different things, and I've been doing like how to say it. I've been evaluating my own positions and thoughts, and a technique I I found out very useful at a pretty young age. I would say around 15 or so. I I realized that those things that sort of are outside the realm of my capabilities of influencing on, they're not going to get any better by sort of thinking about them or worrying about them too much. And that's like a technique that I use how I deal with stress. If it's something that I cannot be helped at this time, then I'm going to maybe make a plan like, well, okay, what can I do about it and when? And after that, I'm going to just sort of put it in a folder and pick the folder up when the time is right to do some action on it. And I've been pretty successful with that. I've been in a lot of stressful situations, but I think I'm pretty good at performing under stress as well, because I'm capable of putting those things aside that I can't affect at each given time. So I think that's sort of the basic technique. I started to realize, well, okay, it is what it is. I cannot help if let's say a permafrost is melting in Siberia and methane is being released to the atmosphere. It's like nothing I can do about it at this moment. So it's not getting any better by me sort of dwelling in the misery. So it's better to make a plan on what is something that I'm capable of influencing, and of course my line of work is related pretty deeply with the climate change, and there's a lot of progress being made, and it's fascinating to see that we have a lot of tools in my field of work, like with the built environment. There's a lot of things that we can approve, and there's a lot of techniques to make that reality, and there are companies already making those things reality. As I mentioned to you in one of our chats, it's a pretty good piece of advice that it's very important and hard things and difficult things, but it's even more useful to be doing those things rather than speaking about them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's incredibly important, everything you just said. And I was reminded a little bit of the Stoic philosophy. I've been reading a great book called The Daily Stoic, and it brings in these wisdom from ancient philosophers. But one thing they do to help with stress and the unknown is they say, what is in my control? What is not in my control? And then what can you do about what's in your control? And that has helped me a lot with anxiety and worry, because all the time I'm thinking, like, I'm just thinking of these catastrophic situations that haven't happened yet. And maybe it's highly likely that they'll happen, but the fact remains, it's out of my control, and letting that go and saying, look, I'll still be breathing tomorrow. I still have my family. I still have my friends, and maybe throwing in some gratitude. It can be kind of peaceful in that sense to just like be like, okay, that's not in my control, and that's a hard thing to do, but I think very useful.
And also something that I would really like to bring up is sort of the more like a, let's say, scientific approach to things, and a wildly important concept to grasp is like regarding to personal choices and preferences is basics of life cycle assessment. So it goes under the three letters LCA. And life cycle assessment is a holistic approach where whatever item it is, it can be like a house or a car or refrigerator or whatever given item, and the holistic approach is evaluating all of the impact that the item has throughout its whole lifespan. So it starts with the raw materials and manufacturing and using, like for example, for a house, it's 50 or 100 years of use, and with that time, there's like renovations and upgrades and energy being used and so forth. And then there's the recycling of the product after it's been used. And that's very significant. And to realize that there are different impact categories that's been evaluated. And that's where many people go wrong in their thinking. And the perfect example is nuclear power. It's the impact categories that are sort of, I think, in my line of thinking, is that the priority is to stop climate change. So global warming potential is the name of the whole thing, and it's equivalence of CO2 emissions. So that's pretty close to zero. It's like 20 grams per kilowatt hour of energy. So it's pretty much the same as with wind energy. And usually people think that when someone is telling them that nuclear energy is very efficient, regardless to climate change, and they are not willing to see it as something that would be emission free, because they're not thinking that we're talking about the CO2 emissions. There's like the radioactive, like the used fuel problem and things like that, but it's a different impact category. So I find a lot of people opposing things with like wrong reasons behind their thinking, and that's obviously in Germany it's backfiring pretty bad. They're posting their clean energy production of nuclear power plants and replacing it with burning the lignite, which is the worst for the climate. Okay. So that's a little backwards, I would say.
Definitely. Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. But for those that are really interested in sort of taking action and fighting and maybe educating themselves what in regards to climate change, is to look the basics. There's like really cool tutorials in YouTube, like for life cycle assessment as a methodology and the impact categories. Those are the basics that I would recommend anyone to know.
Yeah, no, that's all great. Yeah,
what I wanted to bring out.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure a lot of my listeners haven't heard about that and will be interested. So I'll definitely link that as well. I'm curious. So we've talked a lot about problems. Who do you think needs the most help in the world right now? Which is kind of a hard question to answer, but maybe what's a neglected area, you know?
Well, I would say that there's, like I talked about in impact categories, this is also something that could be broken down to different impact categories. And I think if we're looking at contribution to human well-being, I would say equality. So I would say women.
Yeah.
That's a pretty broad answer.
Yeah. Go into more detail, please.
Satisfactory answer to many listeners, but I really think that's the number one accelerator for human like well-being of humankind, is to really make a push to get women have the opportunity to contribute to sciences and well, every aspect of our existence. I think that's something that really needs more attention, because even in countries where equality is considered to be one of the best in the world, when I'm looking at my own country of Finland, there's paid less for same jobs and things like that. And I think that's something that I think it's something it's very essential to fix those kind of inequalities. And of course, there's other impact categories, the third world countries, where there's actually those 19,000 or so children dying every day, just a lack of, let's say, pure water and nutrition. I think that's also something that needs to be continued to be fixed. And you had a wonderful episode with the, I'm sorry, my names escape me all the time. But with the Village X.
Yes,
project.
Mike Buckler. Yeah, episode 7.
Yeah. So could you tell for the listeners the episode?
Sure. So episode 7, I talked to a friend of mine named Mike Buckler. I met him at a Peace Corps event. He has a really exciting organization he's the CEO and founder of called Village X Inc., where, let's say, a village in Malawi, that was the country he did his Peace Corps in, and he knows he's an expert in. Let's say they need a new clean water drinking fountain or something. That's something that the villages agreed they really need. If you, in the U.S., just donate through the app or through the website, not only will they directly get that money that will go to building that water fountain, and it will also employ people in that area, but also you get up-to-date feedback with photos as progress is going forward, and there's kind of a connection that's established, which I think is definitely unique, and he's certainly the real deal. I highly recommend listening to that episode. But tell me what your thoughts were, though.
Yeah, I think that's to fall back a little bit with how to cope with stress and how to get over the anxiety. I think that's a very valuable episode to listen and to see that there are actual ways of helping, and even more important, how to make a resource that's poured into helping, into charities, how to make the most out of it. I think that's overlooked by miles.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's been some discussions on like the rate of what sort of percentage of the money goes to actual charity beyond the costs of running operations and things like that. But it's still, I found it precious to hear about the approach of not being like single issue mission, or rather than making like taking the whole cultural context into consideration and to go from there on. I think that's the most sustainable way of actually pushing the progress.
No, I'm glad it moved you in that way. Something I wanted to add was, I think what partly drove Mike Buckler to so passionately, his whole life be pursuing this, is that he would keep going back to Malawi years and years and years and just seeing no progress. Nothing changing. He says they get like at least $1 billion every year, and it's like there's just nothing to show from it. This is ridiculous. And it's really inspiring.
And I think breaking barriers and doing things different is something that I value. We talked about that earlier in our discussion, and I think that struck me like that there's such a huge impact of directly allocating the money to the people, and so removing all of the bureaucracy and things like that,
just give directly.
And it's like, wow, such a simple solution.
It really is though.
It makes you think
what is everyone else doing? On that subject, I had the privilege, I was at the George Washington University, I got to hear the chief economist of USAID speak, and she does all this work with projects in Africa, and she was saying how so many of those projects had failed, like to do job training or to do certain education initiatives, that they use as their gold standard or their litmus test or their baseline is this new initiative you're proposing within USAID better than giving directly? And 80% of the time, or I forget the statistic, but majority of the time, give directly is better. And they need to think of better solutions, and I like that, I think it's a good
and don't want to sort of relive the whole episode, but the one thing that I was really I found very interesting was the fact that when he gave the example of some charity providing goats to some village.
Yes.
And they're like, well, we're going to welcome and accept the goat, but fertilizement is what we need. Like, who would have thought of like it's a simple thing. It's not a very difficult concept to grasp, that there's like different kind of needs,
right?
And
exactly.
who are we to say that, well, you're going to need some goats now?
Yeah.
So it's like brilliant. Like, go there, ask, well, what would benefit you the most, and and to do some action on those things that they actually need. I think that's like that was a wake up call for me, because I really like to do charity as to the extent as my resources allow me to, and like to sort of start thinking more fresh, and to make sure it's better to do no charity for a year and to spend that year figuring out what makes the most impact the next year, and then the payoff could well be very fast and huge.
No doubt, have you heard of
shooting in dark is never sort of the best approach?
Definitely. Have you ever heard of effective altruism, like the movement? Because what you're talking about with making the most impact, there's a lot of overlap. Basically, with effective altruism, it started like in 2011, but they were thinking like, how can you give the most with $1? So they would do like kind of like rigorous randomized controlled trials, and I think GiveWell, that's located in San Francisco, they would recommend certain charities like Against Malaria Foundation or Give Directly based on certain metrics. And it's not a perfect system by any means, but the philosophy of it and the way they were thinking of like what has the most impact, it just reminded me a lot of what you were saying.
Yeah, and I actually have like one project that just kicked off. It's like in the very early stages of the whole thing, but I have really cool concept of developing like humanitarian dwellings. So that's sort of something that I'm capable of spending some of my working hours on. And also that's something that can be used to sort of monitor and to come up with new solutions with different approach to things. So that's something that I'm involved slightly at the moment. But this also boils down to the source of happiness. And I'm not the right person from the two of us to go into depths of this particular thing. But I think helping is sort of it's a source of happiness. I think in a very large extent. So it's like when you're doing good to others, you're also helping yourself. I think, and I think that's like part of the philosophy that I would consider to be the source of most of my decision making, to making things better and try to push the whole humankind to raise the floor. I think that's something that's also going to be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me as well. So it's
like I like I'm not going to quote this perfectly because I'm really reaching here, but in the past there's this beautiful quote. It's like, how many Einsteins have we never heard of, or poets like Yeats, or brilliant composers like Beethoven, who we never had the pleasure of listening to or reading or benefiting from because they lived in extreme poverty, in their own education. And so I'm quite motivated and quite driven to do a lot of change in that area. One interesting nudge I've noticed that also tied into when I asked you who needs the most help, and you said women, was I did my undergraduate thesis on how higher education in women in Bangladesh directly influences economic development for the whole country. And I would do the statistical analysis, And it was interesting. I liked focusing on Bangladesh because of the progress they've had. They still have a long way to go, but holy shit. You look at a graph from like 1970
Yeah,
to today, you look at the female labor force participation rate, how many women are working. It went from like less than 20% and shot up to like 80%. And it's like, what? That is insane. That's incredible. So,
yeah,
it was
yeah.
so encouraging to see stuff like that because it's like, yeah, there's so much suffering there, but there's so much progress, and yeah, we just got to keep it going.
Yeah, it's a very well known and a very well established concept that empowerment of women
Yeah,
is the cure for poverty.
yeah,
So that's so straightforward,
right,
and that's part of the reason why I gave the answer of
yeah,
who needs the most help would be equality.
sure,
But that's also sort of not all that compassionate to the full extent, because I really see the economical point of the whole thing. Because once we start to sort of to deal our problems so that we're not only importing the bad stuff from globalization, but also the good things.
right,
And if we stop doing the competitive politics and start to grow up in a sense,
right,
just look at how much human resources is being poured in military
yes,
equipment and personnel.
yeah,
It's like wow, if
especially in
all
the
that
US.
money, let's say if we get to a point where half of the money goes to sciences and development and things like that, the world would look different quite fast. Same goes for fighting climate change. That's considered to be like an expense and a nuisance to be putting resources on that. Well, but what about military? It's like, come on,
Yeah, no, I
the
ask that
amount
all
of
the time.
resources poured into that is direct result on sort of not allowing or not speeding up or accelerating the development of like equal chance for humanity type of thinking.
Mm. Yeah, no, all that's really interesting and important. Another thing I thought of, so I took this development economics course, and I had this great professor named Stephen Smith, who wrote the textbook on econ development. He's done all this work in Bangladesh. That's how I found about that country, and Uganda and different African countries. And in our class, he tried not to show his bias, but he did have a point about women empowerment and if you really want to make the world better. And he was talking about how an area he's been focusing on that's super neglected is female rural farmers in sub-Saharan Africa because they constitute like 90% of the farmers in that area, but they get zero of the aid money. All the aid money goes to the men when they only are like 10%. And so that's right, just a huge unknown or ignorant problem people are ignorant of. The other one is the Grameen Bank, I think also in Bangladesh, but the idea of micro lending. So you give a
Yeah,
little bit to spear entrepreneurship. They had such higher success rates lending to women than lending to men. There's such a statistically significant difference where you can count on the
yeah,
women to take care of the children, whereas the guys, it's like it's a bit of an unknown. And what's so moving to me, what almost makes me cry, was seeing like that there would be like a 95% repay rate on the loans. So anyone who was skeptical of this idea, you want to think a Nobel Peace Prize for this, but anyone who was skeptical on the idea, it's like, well, there it is. So
yeah.
go lend your money. But,
Yeah, and it ties down to the point I was trying to make that like equality is still like the huge low hanging fruit
yes,
in the
yeah,
way
sure,
of
yeah,
global economics.
yep,
So that I see that very important to achieve as fast as possible.
hmm
And well, okay, it's probably something that it's never going to be achieved. It's like one of those things that the progress is slow and it's constant.
right,
And I think that's why we need Jordan Peterson. Even I don't like the guy so far, but
yeah,
that's why I put the value on on him. And of course, there are some scary things as well. And some of them, I'm usually the kind of person that is almost let's say impossible to I don't get offended like hardly ever.
Yeah.
But when I saw like a Facebook post on something like let's say sort of the opposite of what you posted
Yeah.
on like the statistics that happen, and it was made by a Finnish woman, and it was like saying that things that women do like out of fear, and it was like
Oh yeah.
putting 7 locks into their doors and
keys in their hands.
Thinking about going to places when it's dark and
Yes.
things like that, and it was like almost painting a picture where women are only capable of being afraid of being raped or something like that. And I was like, well, that's not the case at all.
Yeah.
Like that's so far-fetched. And I sort of realized that this is really offensive because I consider myself to be like the kindest creature you would ever meet.
Yeah.
And it's putting pressure on me, like in some weird way. I was being threatened by this whole idea, in a sense, and to be seeing there's so many people being accused of let's say, in a worst case scenario, they're being accused of like misbehaving or something to that extent, and they're being like almost crucified. Their
no mercy.
Public careers are destroyed and things like that. And I'm like, well, how easy it is to get involved in that sort of thing. And all it takes is someone to have some grudge and to just post something and the thing could explode like just immediately.
One tweet. Yeah, it can take just one tweet. And what I like, I'm from a country, America, where that's at its height, right? And it's like, on one hand, I'm amazed by the Me Too movement, but I'm also disappointed by the lack of nuance. And so you have someone like Harvey Weinstein that was a predator and was horrible and he got punished and should have been more punished and fine. But then you have someone like Aziz Ansari. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's this Indian comedian. He essentially had a bad date with a woman. There was a miscommunication between him and a fan. They ended up doing sexual things. She didn't feel that comfortable about it, but she didn't verbally say that she was uncomfortable about it. And then eventually when he was going to have sex with her, she kind of pushed him off him and said, no, I want to go home. And he said, okay. And he called her an Uber. And this is all her words, by the way, not even his story. It's from her perspective. And so he called her an Uber. She got home. And then after she was home, she texted him saying, hey, I really didn't want to do any of that. And I'm really upset. And then she wrote an article and then it went viral online. And then Aziz Ansari's career got totally, not destroyed, but totally dismantled. People booed him when he was nominated for an Emmy and all this stuff. And it's like, it's too much. It's excessive. And there are some women in the movement who have spoke against that kind of, they call it witch hunt or whatever, but whatever you want to call it, if this is a spectrum, this sexual assault thing, or sexual deviance, Harvey Weinstein and Aziz Ansari on the opposite sides of the spectrum. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I know, and the lack of nuances is pretty much the core of what I wanted to express myself, because I'm not taking lightly that there are some misconducts happening all the time that shouldn't, and it's sort of something that should be extinct from our culture, and it still hasn't. But I think they're overdoing it with the Me Too thing, because it's becoming like I'm thinking like, well, I'm scared, and I'm pretty convinced that I'm always going to be kind of polite, and I have very low risk of getting in the way of anything like that, and I'm still a little scared.
Yeah, so and you're a feminist. You're on their team.
My personality was slightly different, and I would to approach women, and like I would not have fingernails. Yeah. But that's sort of something that I think it's a phenomenon, and it's going to wear off and settle down, I think.
Maybe, eventually it has to. I mean, scientifically or whatever. But I'm curious how Me Too movement though has influenced Finland, because America that's where started.
Can you repeat that?
Yes. How has the Me Too movement influenced Finland? Relations between men and women. Just what's it been like in Finland, or is it just?
I think it's been like a like this might sound a little funny, but I would say I sort of welcome the whole thing, because there's been pretty severe stuff being exposed through this, even in our parliament. There's been a lot of this happening, like sexual harassment in the cultural side of things, like in some movie productions and things like that. And I think it's pretty alarming, because I would have liked to think that wasn't going on to the extent that obviously it has been going on.
Right.
But also it's really disturbing to read or to get involved in dialogues.
Right.
Regarding the whole aspect, because then I'm also reading a lot of text and posts from women when they are like accepting, like well, it's normal, it's flattering when they're getting attention and things like that.
Right.
And it's difficult to draw the line.
Yeah.
Because the same conduct, some women are experiencing it to be flattering, and other ones are going to start screaming and taking you into court.
Yeah,
so it's like, I like, okay, one more reason to be happily married. I don't have to
yeah, you don't have to flirt anymore. You don't have to go out. So you're safe.
Yeah, but I'm like thinking, well, what if I were to be sort of still finding my better half?
Yeah,
like,
it'd be hard.
Okay.
That would be me. You'd be me right now, essentially.
Yeah, I would find this a little worrying, at the least.
Honestly, though, I've been very refreshed living in Amsterdam. The Dutch women I've talked to, some women I've talked to from other countries, they're much more. I need to be careful with my word choice, but much more easy to talk to with difficult matters, right? I think I told you, maybe this was before recording, but the night before Jordan Peterson came to University of Amsterdam, I got into a heated debate with a woman about him, and we had diametrically opposed views. But we had a very civil, lovely conversation, and we're friends, So I like that, and I don't know if I would find that as frequently in America. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's sort of something that, well, this is obviously going to segue nicely and naturally to one of your questions,
Yes.
but like countries or places that I would like to visit. And it's like, I've never been to the North American continent, and I find that sort of weird, because I've been exposed to so much of the culture, and I'm not talking about the Hollywood productions. I'm just trying to follow some of the discourse, like I explained, in order to hear more three-dimensional use of language and things like that, and of course interesting topics. And I find it like weird. There's a lot of these characters I sort of would like to think that I sort of know them.
Yeah.
And of course there's a lot of friendships, like in Facebook and things like that. And I've seen sort of the both sides of the coin, and I would like to think that I know what to expect, but it's weird because I can't be certain. And of course it's such a huge country, so there's I would expect there's wild differences in where you're going to land in the south or Colorado. It's probably not going to be.
It's very different.
Not going to be feeling like a same country or.
No, for sure. Wait, sorry. So hold that thought. I just gotta take a piss real quick. I'll edit that out.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah, okay. I followed your lead.
Yeah, we've been talking for a while.
Same bodily functions. So yeah, let's take
care of level 1
take
needs.
a minute. Yeah, yeah. Man's gonna do what man's gonna do.
Yeah. That just reminded me. I like writing, and so this new system that I'd like to say that I created. I'm sure many people. It's loosely based off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a psychologist. But I call it like level 1, level 2, level 3 needs. Like level 1 is all physiological, so when you need to piss, when you need to sleep, when you need to have sex, food, water, right? So level 1, it's really important to take care of. After that, level 2 is like more social, so it's like friendships, community, lovers, or lover, not lovers, children, whatever, right? So social, and then above that, it's like meaning. So doing something that has purpose gets you out of bed in the morning, and I think it's important that you satisfy level 1 before you move on to level 2, and then satisfy level 2 before level 3.
Yeah, that's a pretty neat concept. Yeah.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I like it.
Yeah, reminds me of he's a Canadian Facebook friend. He's a superb advocate of Finnish music. He's a really cool dude. He's originally from Portugal.
Okay.
And he said this Facebook poll, and the question was pretty simple. And I hastened to answer it, and it was like, when you're taking a dump, which comes first, the piss or the shit? And it was like, only after answering the poll, I was like, well, actually, now that I start thinking, it's like, never sort of crossed my mind. Like, I've been doing that, I don't know how many thousands of times, and still didn't sort of know the answer.
Yeah, that's funny.
Weird. Weird.
No, it's weird because I actually have something relevant to that. I read somewhere somebody everyone thinks they wipe their butt the same way or something, but it's like some people stand up while they do it, others stay sitting in the toilet, and apparently it's close to 50-50. Yeah. So a lot of people be like, why would you ever stand, or why would you stay sitting?
Yeah,
just one of those things.
Actually, a funny thing came up from that. It's a prank that we played on one of my friends from youth, let's say from age 15 or so. Mm-hmm. We were like a bunch of guys hanging out. I think we were like 4 guys, and one of them sort of said something like, yeah, it's funny how we when we're taking a dump, we're also taking a piss, and I started trolling the guy, like, what? And funny enough, all the other mates were playing along, and we were like really getting the guy confused, like no, and he was like, well, yeah, and we were like, all like, no, that's not normal. And we got to a point where the guy was like, yeah, I really need to see a doctor, because we were like, yeah, that's severe, like, that's not normal. He was getting super confused about the whole thing.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. Should we continue with
Yes. Well, to get back on topic,
yeah,
I'm curious. So this is a totally new topic, but who would you most love to have a coffee conversation with? And it can be anyone who's alive or dead, but I'm curious, what kind of mind you'd want to pick or discuss ideas with.
This is a really difficult pick, but I think I'm compelled to pick like some of the intellectual giants from the past, like Einstein or something like that. Even Milutin Milankovic, Serbian scientist engineer, who was the guy who invented the sort of rotation of the ice age frequency of 30,000 years or so, someone like that. But actually, I don't know. This is sort of random, but I would love to talk with Sam Harris. I don't know exactly. I can't sort of put my finger on the point.
Yeah.
Mostly because I would really like to sort of interact with the guy directly, because at some point I realized that I'm starting to look up to Sam Harris to the extent that I'm starting to lose objectivity. So I sort of had to dial back a little bit, intentionally, just to sort of. Well, I'm not the kind of person who would worship anyone or whatever, but I was sort of struck with the whole concept of, well, I'm pretty much agreeing to everything, and I'm usually not agreeing to every detail. So I started to some sort of alarm bell went off, like, well, I'm probably not being very objective. I'm just absorbing everything he's saying. So I had to dial back a little bit, and I took a little break from waking up podcast and things like that. Yeah. So trying to look for other idols. Yeah, but I would really like to explore the whole thing, because it's the concept of pretty much always when you're sort of looking up to someone very highly, and when you meet them, you're going to be disappointed, and sort of in a
never meet your hero.
Thinking that maybe that would sort of make Sam Harris to look like a human being more.
Yeah. I think with him, because though,
we're all flawed in some ways. Yes. So I find it a little scary to agree to everything. I'm pretty sure I'm going to. I grew some sort of bias, I would say.
So on the subject of Sam Harris and meeting him, recently I became friends with this Canadian girl who's a big fan of Sam Harris and a big fan of the Joe Rogan podcast, and also Jordan Peterson as well. But she's actually met Sam Harris. She had him sign one of a copy of her book, and she had all these tabs all over and everything. And she said, like, there's a picture I saw of her with Sam Harris on Facebook, and he seemed so nice. So like, I think he's a safe person to meet in real life. But like she said, she made him laugh because she was he was signing new books, but she brought one of her old books that had all these tabs everywhere. He's like, oh, I see you like my book. Like, really reading it there.
Yeah.
You know, but I love how calm he is, you know, like listening to him speak. Not only do I learn so much, of course, and I really admire him kind of like you do, but it can even like put you to sleep if you're really stressed, you know, like it's so calming. I like one joke someone made. They said, wow, like artificial intelligence has gotten so incredible that Sam Harris almost sounds like a human. Like, it's so crazy. Because he's the most articulate person I know. I mean, I think Degrasse Tyson was on his podcast and told him that, like, your vocabulary is like insane, but like 40,000 words or something. But I don't know, you know, I really like his story too, his life story. Sam Harris, they talk about
and to be formulating thoughts on very complex issues and to remain like as calm as you said. It's like I haven't sort of met that trait in any other individual that I would recognize.
Right.
I think so I really admire the guy in pretty much all aspects.
And
well, of course he's so well read and everything, and he has these special areas. So some of the things, even if I don't disagree, but some of the things are not sort of something that would resonate with me. So some of the, let's say, religion is interesting and all, but not sort of that interested in it. So some of the topics that he deals with are like not in the core of my interests.
Sure.
But but whatever he does, it's like the modest touch.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was just gonna say, watching the debate, or it wasn't even really a debate, but the contrast between Sam Harris and Ben Affleck when they're on Bill Maher's real-time show, you know, and Bill Maher got super emotional about Islam, and Sam Harris is like a robot, you know. He's almost like, it's almost like a weakness to be that stoic, because like regular humans are gonna like treat you differently, you know what I mean? They're gonna be like, why is he not getting emotional? Like, what's going on there? He's just like meditating. I can see it. I know he's just practicing his meditation, but
and even when he's so well composed and like a gentleman type of character, but he still underneath has like this wonderful sense of humor, and he's willing to make fun out of himself. Like I remember some. I think it wasn't a debate. It was like some sort of public speech engagement, and he was like saying that, well, I could be claiming that I can read minds, like, and he's pointing at someone in the audience, like at this moment you're thinking like, why does he look like Adam Sandler?
Ben Stiller.
Yeah, the crowd. There's like 80% of the audience obviously thinking that, and he's also capable of thinking on his feet.
Yeah.
And coming up with these wonderful analogies. It's like amazing to analyze like what's going on rather than focusing on the content itself. I find it like he's very intriguing in so many levels. It's wonderful.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything. I think what stands out about him to me is how clear he is in his thoughts, in his writing, in his speech. It's quite inspirational to me, like how carefully he chooses every word. I mean, I remember when the first time I was listening to Waking Up podcast, I'm like, man, he doesn't misspeak once. Like he's so careful. My God.
Yeah. I know. He's, like you said, it's easy to fall asleep in a sense, and it's due to the fact that listening to him at his best, it's like he's pouring velvet into listeners' ears. It's like so smooth and I totally get the point.
Yeah, and this whole meditative practice.
Very true.
Yeah, so anyways, enough on Sam Harris. I dream one day of having him as a guest or to be on the Waking Up podcast. That'd be incredible, but why he's still doing it, you know? But he seems healthy.
I would think this is not something... well, let's put it this way. I really see that happening because, like I mentioned to you, is that when I got to listen to your podcasts, I immediately picked on the fact that these dialogues they're sort of imperfect in sense because the guests are not sort of the Sam Harris type.
Yeah, they don't have a script coming in.
It leaves room for improvement, and that provokes like thoughts because it's easier to sort of the listener to jump in on the thoughts and to formulate like better versions and analogies and to add your own ideas. As with Sam Harris's thoughts, well, it's like can't see myself adding much value to his.
I would just have questions. I don't know if I'd be contributing to the conversation. I would just ask him things, but
So that's something that I find valuable and unique.
Thank you.
Because it's been, well, of course I can't say anything about this particular episode.
Oh, you'll see it.
But so far I've really enjoyed it because there's a lot of new things. I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
Like the altruism thing and of course the economical side being intertwined with other aspects of scientific method. So it's very interesting with the content. And also something that I wanted to sort of give you like a personal shout out is that you were kind enough to invite me.
Yeah.
And I think I haven't heard much conversations between one of the participants not being a native English speaker, and something that I think it's a disturbing fact because there's like brilliant minds, obviously,
of course,
in non-English speaking countries, and we don't get to hear so much of them. And I by no means I don't want to label myself to be an intellect or anything, but to have these conversations, it's very nice. I really appreciate the chance, and also something that I would segue from to another topic related to this, and I think that's the machine learning and how that's going to help communications over the boundaries of language, because the machine so much of the languages that they're probably going to do a pretty good job at some point in translating things. So I'm expecting like a more fruitful discourse between different languages and populations that hold different languages.
Yeah, I mean, something I wanted just to add on to all the wonderful things, and I really appreciate it, but just to remind the listeners, we've never met in person. You messaged me on Facebook after a mutual friend of ours, I guess, on Facebook, Zeke Sky, who I'll have next week. I made him moderator, or he asked to be moderator on my Facebook page, and then he invited all his fans. And so now my thing went from having like 30 likes from friends over the past 8 months to like 350 or 400 likes in a week or less, which is just mind blowing. But the greatest consequence of that was you reaching out to me and saying, "Oh, I think I have a guest, that might be good." And so I was totally open to it. And then I looked up who that guest was. It's like wrote the best science book in Finland in 2017. I'm like, okay, this is like next level. And this guy who I've literally never talked to, never met, we just messaged briefly on Facebook. You're already giving me so much. And then I'm like, oh, I need to have him on my podcast. And what a great episode this turned out.
And I was like, well, okay. And I'm the kind of person who's jumping in on opportunities to interact and meet other people. And it's amazing that we were only so recently brought together by a mutual friend. Right. And there are these wonderful individuals that you can meet. And all you need to do is to just be open and be active. And I've met a lot of like fantastic people around the world. And there's and there's like this history of meeting people online goes back, I would say, roughly 4 years ago. I was really active in playing chess online. And I met this Dutch guy in one of the online chess clubs, and we started to talk about different things. And he's like, really, I consider him to be like a brother to me. He's like, we're so kindred spirited. It's almost frightening. It's like we're ending each other's sentences, and of course it's
that's beautiful.
So that's had a huge impact on my life, and some other really, really nice people that I met. I would like to mention, and I got permission from this individual, Austin Setner, and he's from Texas, great state of Texas, and he posted something his band did in a Facebook group for Finnish metal fans, and he was like asking, well, would you come and see my band if we came to Finland? And I was like, well, yeah, like the stuff, and if the venue was in my close proximity, I would definitely come in. And ever since that, we've been really good friends. We don't have to be chatting like on a daily basis. It's one of those interactions that doesn't require to be in a live support of messaging whatever every now and then. Right. We can spend like a week without doing anything, and then we start chatting. And he's a considerably younger guy, and he's actually coming this January to Finland to record an album with his band, and we're going to obviously meet up and look this wonderful people that you can meet online with app things. It's going to have a positive impact on your life, and that's my take on behaving in social media. Is like, well, if you don't have anything constructive or positive to contribute, well, don't. Keep scrolling.
Classic role.
Like, not everything is there for my liking. So it's. I think it's wonderful that we have this opportunity to shrink the world to fit in our pockets. It's amazing.
It's absolutely extraordinary. I've benefited so much from my smartphone and from Facebook Messenger and from LinkedIn. Pretty much every job I've ever had every interesting guest I've had on this podcast. Most of them, anyways. If I hadn't met them in real life, it was through online, and it works so well. And it was touching when you said like you're the first guest I've had where English is your second language, right?
Yeah.
So my goal from the very beginning, even before I recorded the first episode, is to interview someone from every single country. I really want to have it as international as possible.
Wow, yeah.
And so now I realize it's like, yeah, okay, my second guest was born in Zimbabwe, so yes, that's a first, but he's living in America. And then I had another guest who's spent a lot of time in Ethiopia, but they're still living in America. So it's only until I moved to Amsterdam, right, where it's like now I'm surrounded by all sorts of international people. I definitely want to have one of my Norwegian friends on in the future as a guest, but the thing is like I'm biased towards like more diversity. So it's like when I connected with you and we had some chemistry and I saw you're from Finland, like that's enough. I'm like, okay, I'm interviewing someone from Finland. I know nothing about this country.
Yeah,
perfect.
I was really surprised, and I was like, well, immediately, of course I'm going to do it. And only after that, I was like feeling a little pressure, like, well, am I going to be able to contribute?
Yes, that's a lot of my friends
make an episode that would be of any interest to anyone to listen to. But I was like, well, you have to do things and take risks, and not to take yourself too serious, and with the little interaction that we have had through messages, it's been pretty obvious that this is a nice guy, so
we have a lot in common.
To be afraid of it. It's not going to bite my head off.
Yeah, I'm not like asking to meet at some gas station. I mean, it's just online. I can't do anything, But so just to wrap up, because it has been 2 hours, which is great. I think the longest one I had was 2.5, but he was in the same room as me, and anyways.
Yeah.
But to wrap up, yes, final question. Which I always end my episodes with. What are the most memorable words of advice you have ever received?
Okay. Well, I have to make a joke here because it's wonderful advice when you actually analyze it. But it's like, always be yourself. Unless you can be Batman, then be Batman. And it's like okay, well, that's more profound than what it comes across, but I would say a short answer would be the translation. This is from my father, and something that he taught me from very early age on is that never half-assed anything. Like never half-assed two things, full-assed one thing, and it's a pretty solid, good advice, I would say.
Yeah, if you can't do something well, don't even do it to begin with.
Yeah.
It's a good conclusion. No,
and that's something that I had to learn, that it's okay sometimes not to do something. And it's a pretty valuable piece of advice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to add a little bit to your first one, the joke about be yourself unless you can be Batman. You can kind of alter that a little bit to like, be yourself or accept yourself unless you can be a better version of yourself, then do that. And so to have something
and that's exactly
towards.
Why I thought it's more profound.
Yeah.
And it's like to everyone sort of has the superhero in them in a sense. And if they think they don't, they need to do some searching and find out that, we're absolutely capable of sort of outperforming ourselves even. So that's
well, okay, I think that's an excellent note to end on. We covered so many brilliant topics.
I really enjoyed taking part of this wonderful thing, and I can't wait to see the podcast grow into the size it needs to be.
Oh, you're very kind, and I want you to know, and the listeners to know, that you were a catalyst to this. I can feel that. So thank you for everything.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's keep in touch, and thank you.
Yeah.